Now, I also want to show you another way of diagramming all this. So with this, I'll be showing you what you can call astrological Sankhya. Sankhya is the philosophical system of India that breaks down all the components of reality very clearly. So we can take this Sankhya and put it in an astrological context, and using that, understand the key fundamental symbols of each planet. So we start with the sun, which is consciousness itself, the source of all light, the source of the ability to see. That's the sun in its pure context, but then the sun wants to reach into this external world of external objects, so it reflects onto the moon, and by doing so, it generates what we're going to eventually call our inner self, or the heart. It's very difficult to find an English word for this. It's chitta in Sankhya, in Sanskrit. It's a type of a mind, but it's very, very basic mind. It's just taking consciousness and letting it reflect upon other things, letting it reflect upon the external world. What happens when reflecting on the other things is that the consciousness now develops a sense of identity distinct from those things, and an ambition on how to interact with those things, which ones it wants, which ones it doesn't want. So this in Samkhya is called ahankara, which we'll call ego, or identity, or ambition. And that's what the sun actually represents here in this world. In its own pure, pristine state, it represents the pure jiva, the pure consciousness. But here, in this world of karma, the sun doesn't represent the pure consciousness. The sun represents our ego, our identity, and our sense of who we are and what we want. After having this sense of who we are, distinct from other things, and what we want, then this heart operates as what we call a mind. The chitta operates as a manas. And so the moon is both of these things. It's the chitta itself, which is just the fundamental reflection of consciousness into the world, but it functions as the mind, or the manas. See, that consciousness reflects into the world from the chitta, and then it develops an identity separate from other objects. That's your ahankar. And then it says, I like this one, I don't like this one. I like this object, I don't like this one. I want this one, I don't want that one. So that part of this and that, that's the mind. And it's going to generate opinion. The mind holds your opinions, and it holds your desires. My opinion, this is good. My desire, I want it. My opinion, this is bad. My desire, I don't want it. And then from your opinions come your emotions. And this is what the moon is most famous for. It's your emotions. Emotions are the most perceptible part of your manas, your mind. So you'll feel emotions based on whether or not you get your desires fulfilled or not. Now, when you have your desires and opinions about things, then you're going to want to actually reach towards them and get the goals. So now this reaching out begins from the inner self to the outer self. And the beginning of that reaching out is something called the buddhi, the intellect. And that's what Mercury is. So Mercury is the evolution of the moon, the mind, into intellect, Mercury. Intellect is the bridge between the data of the external world and the experiencer. So it branches to the outer self, and the way that it branches is through Rahu and Ketu. Rahu is the externalizing force, and Ketu is the internalizing force. So those are the channels of prana through which the data on the electrochemical nervous system can be transmitted into the supra-physical intellect. And then you're going to get from Mercury is going to evolve into one component of the body, which is Venus, the senses of perception, the Gyanendriya, the incoming senses, the receptive senses, the feminine senses, the things which take things in. And the other aspect of the outer self is Mars. Venus evolves into Mars, the senses of action, the Karmendriya. Those are the masculine senses, the senses which initiate activity and put create things going outward from the intellect. They affect the world. They act upon the world. So we're taking Sankhya now and mapping the evolution of the planets to Sankhya. So we got this idealized sun as the pure consciousness, but it reflects on the moon. And still, this is like an abstracted reflection. It's just a heart. It's just a sentience, capacity for sentience. The first real concrete thing that it becomes is represented by the sun, which is the ego. That ego then has ambitions, and it therefore generates the moon's first tangible implication, which is the mind, which is all our desires and emotions. Then the desires and emotions want to reach out. They become the intellect, which is Mercury. It reaches out through Rahu and Ketu back and forth to the outer self, the body, which is composed of inward senses and outward senses. The inward senses are Venus and the outward senses are Mars. The outward senses like your hands, your feet, things that let you do stuff to the world. Then we still have Jupiter and Saturn to talk about. Jupiter and Saturn are the functions of the inner mind. The functions of the mind and the intellect, the inner self. Jupiter is pravritti, which is acceptance. It's the positive planet. It's the part of the mind which says, I like that, or I want that. It's the part of the intelligence which says, this is good. And then Saturn is nivritti, the negative part of the intelligence, the rejection part. It's the part which says, this is bad, get rid of it. Jupiter says, this is good, bring it in. And Saturn says, this is bad, get rid of it. If it's in the intellectual part of the inner self, then this is all about ideas and information. Or if it's in the emotional part of the inner self, then it's just about your opinions and your desires. So that's how you can map the key symbolism of the planets to the Indian system of Sankhya.